That takes us to the question simply entitled collective consciousness. Very short background. I'm a psychologist and a Siddh, and very interested in collective consciousness, as well as the collective unconscious, in brackets, Carl J. Jung, and the collective trauma, in brackets, Thomas Hobel. I'm trying to navigate through my personal circumstances and longing to also beneficially engage with the current collective consciousness. A question. I would like to hear your description of collective consciousness, and also if and how you see it interconnected with Maharishi's 7 states of consciousness. So the last here reference is given to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's exposition on the 7th state of consciousness. For those of you who are not familiar, which consists of the 3 relative states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep. The 4th, the so-called Turiya, the transcendent. The 5th state of consciousness, identified by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi as cosmic consciousness, often referred by me for the sake of clarity as the witnessing state of consciousness. Then the 6th state of consciousness, known as God consciousness, or deep refinement of perception, the so-called celestial perception. Finally, the unity consciousness, which is the unity or the union of subject and object. In addition, inside the TM movement, in certain circles, there are talks of the yet an extra level of consciousness, not with reference to the 7 aforementioned ones, but simply standing alone, referred to often as Brahm consciousness, as Brahm, from the Sanskrit term Brahma, or to expand, Brahman, or to expand. So the question is curious to hear my description of collective consciousness, and if there is any interrelation with the 7 states of consciousness as described by Maharishi. Well, the simple answer to that, and this will be also paying tribute to the way Maharishi Mahesh Yogi spoke about it, is very simple, and I'd like to keep us all on the same page, so I don't want to lose anyone. So collective state of consciousness is simply a sum total of individual states of consciousness. That's all. Just like you have a jar of basmati rice. Each of this grain of rice represents, let's say, individual state of affairs. But the whole jar with whatever, 10,000, 100,000 of the grains of rice would comprise this whole jar of basmati rice. Any other example you prefer, please feel free to use it. So collective state of consciousness is made out of some total of individual state of affairs of what takes place here in you and me. However, there is this interesting thing which you might have heard me often bringing into the focal point of attention, that although the collective state of consciousness is a sum total comprised of individual state of consciousness, where it can literally be applied to a family, a tribe, a nation, a whole country, a continent perhaps, you see, that what is then formed as a collective state of consciousness impacts in turn each and every one individual. So it's not a one-way affair, and it's not a passive kind of entity. That collective state of consciousness is not some kind of a sleepy genie made out of all the heartbeats of the individuals of this or that tribe. The collective state of consciousness here, it's consciousness, an active consciousness here. And this relationship between so-called individualized consciousness and collective consciousness in the dynamic tension of interaction. Collective consciousness impacts each individual in as much and up to a point when each and every individual exists at a certain level of consciousness and at the mercy of certain levels of consciousness he or she have reached in this lifetime to a given moment in time. With the expansion of consciousness, obviously, we have the capacity to rise above the level of collective consciousness. And there are many examples to that can be given from various fields of life, where so-and-so born in certain unprivileged circumstances where one can see almost no way out, one rises above these circumstances simply because one is able to rise by virtue of their ability to be more conscious in every way, whether the way they are displaying their talents in any particular area. But I don't want to limit that to only, let's say, some canonical examples of those who born on the periphery only to die in Paris, or some of the celebrities, let's say, who became known despite all the odds of their very humble origins. I want also to extend that simply to being born in a family where there's no interest in a society, in school, university, where no one was influencing them, and yet they grew, they looked out, they've made and formed these connections. They, as it were able to bend the circumstances in their favor. So this is a primal example of being able to overcome the limitations of, let's say, collective state of consciousness, which imposes its quality on an individual. And you asking here to see this interconnectedness with the way Maharishi has outlined the seventh state of consciousness. Well, it's very clear here in terms of with the growth and expansion of consciousness, individual become cosmic, just as Maharishi spoke about it. Individual grows beyond the boundaries of given family, tribe, beyond the boundaries of one's, let's say, personal story. Even still confined to the limitations of this body, to the limitations imposed by certain planetary karmic influences, which all of us are subject to, irrespective of who we are and where we are in our evolution, unless we reach the status where we can create universe out of sheer desire to, we're not talking about this. We're talking about something applicable to you and I. So in this more applicable state of affairs, this is very clear that with the growth of consciousness, we can reach the status where collective consciousness no longer imposes its limitations upon us. We, in fact, begin to influence collective consciousness by virtue of greater conductivity that is taking place in this space-time phenomena. Something you may want to look in the book of Wayne Dyer, where he talked about it, how each individual whose levels of consciousness reached progressively, by the way, he utilized that same ladder that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi spoke about, the seven states of consciousness, how, let's say, individual who primarily deals and dwells at the level of mundane consciousness, subjected to only the rotating frequencies of the waking, dreaming, deep sleep, with some occasional transcendence given as a break during the deep sleep, but not much more than that, emits only that level of vibratory power. And with that, as it begins to grow, someone whose awareness reaches the status of transcendence, because they simply do that on a daily basis. The transcendental state of consciousness is the daily status. This is the daily. They exhume a very different level of energy and vibration. And so it goes. The greater the capacity to reflect that, the more conscious we are, the more we can influence the environment without us doing anything about it, without us thinking about it. In fact, it completely goes against that whole thing of trying to do something, trying to influence something. It happens automatically by virtue of its being second nature to where consciousness is. I trust this satisfies your curiosity.